Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How are you doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. If things look a little different today, that's because they are. I'm in my backyard, but I'm actually a bit up off the ground in my biggest tree in my backyard, a very large eucalyptus tree. Eucalyptus trees are very important to today's subject of our critter chat, the koalas. Now, I don't have a koala with me today, but I do have a very nice photo of a koala. And so today we're going to talk about koalas. First off, koalas are not bears. They're not koala bears, that's not their name. They're just koalas. Although that is something that has confused people for a very long time. Scientists who first described koalas used words to describe them such as pouched bear. And so the bear idea kind of stuck for a really long time. And if you look at them, they kind of look like a bear, right? They have big round ears. They're really fuzzy. They're kind of got a big nose like a bear, but they're not a bear. They're very, very, very far distant related to bears. Both animals are mammals, and that's about where the similarities end. They are part of the marsupial group of mammals, that most of which live in Australia. So the koala's closest relative is actually a ground-dwelling animal called a wombat. More on them in another episode. But we're going to talk a bit about koalas and their life in the eucalyptus trees today. Eucalyptus is a big family of many species of trees. There's over 600 species of eucalyptus trees in Australia. But koalas only use or eat about 3 dozen of them. So about 36 different types of eucalyptus. The others are all too toxic. All eucalyptus trees are a bit toxic or poisonous. If I were to try to eat this, it would make my belly hurt a lot. And it would be the case for most animals who would try to eat them. But koalas, that's all they eat is eucalyptus. And so they typically live in a little home range that includes some of their favorite kinds of eucalyptus trees. They usually have 2 or 3 species of eucalyptus that they really like the most. And then they'll eat between 5 and 7 other kinds. So each koala kind of has its own individual preference for which types of trees it eats. And certainly koalas in different areas of the country of Australia will eat slightly different species of eucalyptus. But with eucalyptus being so toxic and hard to digest, not many animals can eat it. There's some bugs that will eat some of its leaves or its flowers, and there's 2 other marsupials in Australia that will eat its leaves on occasion, a glider species and a possum species. But koalas are truly the only animal that eat just eucalyptus. And because of that, they have some very special adaptations to living in the trees and being able to eat the eucalyptus trees. If you've ever smelled eucalyptus, it has a really nice fresh smell, almost a minty smell or kind of like a cough drop. That smell is very important to koalas. Before they ever eat anything, they pull it close to their nose like this, using their hands or their paws, and they'll pull it close up to their nose and smell it really well. With their nose, they can detect how nutritious, they can detect the water content of the leaves, and they can test for toxicity. Because if it's too toxic, they won't eat it. So they don't even eat all the leaves on any one tree. What they're really after are these, the little brand new leaves, the leaves right on the edge of the branches that have the least amount of toxin in them and that have the best amount of water or nutrition in them. And that's very important for koalas because they rarely want to come down from their trees. They prefer to live up in the forest, up in the trees, sometimes 150 feet up off the ground. So they have a lot of great adaptations that help them to live an arboreal or tree-dwelling life. So as you can see in this picture of my friend here, this koala, down here, his very large rounded rear end, and actually his spine is curved as well. It's very round. That helps him to be able to sit really well in the branches of trees. And that helps him to be able to stay a long time up in the trees without having to come down. Typically, they'll spend a couple days in a specific tree, or if it has a really lot of leaves, they may stay a week in a certain tree before moving on to another one. And if possible, they'll move up high. They'll move from one branch over to another branch in a different tree, instead of having to come down to the ground. When they're on the ground, they're a little slow moving and can be a bit more vulnerable to predators, and it expends a lot of energy. Now, in eating eucalyptus and eating the leaves, there's not a lot of nutrients there. And so koalas, they also do a lot to conserve energy because they're not getting a lot of nutrition. They're not getting a lot of energy from eating the leaves. So they have to be careful with how they use their energy. In fact, as they eat the eucalyptus, they will also spend between 18 and 20 hours of a day sleeping or resting. So they're usually very much just huddled up in a tree and just kind of a little fur ball that you can see from a distance. And unless you know they're moving or unless you know they're there, they can be quite difficult to spot. But as they live in their trees, they'll usually be awake for about 4, maybe 6 hours of the day. And during that time, they'll look for and eat their food. They have very specialized teeth that help them to kind of shear the leaves off the tree and kind of chomp them up and then swallow them. But even inside, down in their digestive tract, they have a very special organ that helps them to digest the eucalyptus, and it's called a cecum. And a cecum is something that most mammals who eat plants have, and most mammals who eat a lot of plants have a very good, highly developed cecum. Humans have a cecum too. We just don't use ours very much, and it's pretty obsolete, and it's sometimes called an appendix. But a cecum in a koala is very well developed, and it contains millions of different types of bacteria that help them to be able to digest the tough fibers in the eucalyptus leaves. Now, they will sometimes eat the flowers off of the eucalyptus tree as well, but it's pretty much the flowers and the leaves. Eucalyptus trees also get little nuts or seeds on them, and the koalas pretty much don't eat those. They typically go after the juicy leaves. Now, because they spend most of their time up in the trees, they also have some really good adaptations. And you can't see it as well on here, but on the photo that I posted earlier on the Facebook or on Instagram, if you look really closely at the koala's front paw, his hand, you may notice that their hand's a little different than ours. They kind of have these 3 fingers together and these 2 fingers together. And these are both thumbs. So they have 2 thumbs on each hand. That really helps them to be able to grab really well as they're climbing the tree. And if you look at that little guy who I posted earlier, he also has really sharp claws on the end of each of the fingers. And that helps him to be able to hold on tight to that bark of the tree as they're climbing. Now, in addition to that, they also have a really good nose. Their nose can help them to sense the importance of the leaves that they're eating, but it also works as a great way to help them communicate. They communicate a bit with sounds. They can make a number of different sounds, including some snorts, some screams, and the male koala actually makes a sound called a bellow that's really quite loud and a little scary sounding. That's kind of similar to like how a lion uses its roar to kind of announce its territory, to call on any other males nearby and say, hey, this is my space. If you're a male and you're here, get out. Or also to let them know that if there's females in the area that are maybe looking for a mate, that they are there and ready to breed. Now, in addition to their hearing, they also can communicate through their sense of smell. On the male koalas, in this section of their chest, right where their ribs meet up, there's kind of a white patch of fur, And then in the middle of that, there's no fur in the very middle. And it's usually kind of yellow or orange colored, and they have a very strong scent gland right there. And with that, they'll rub that on the edge of the tree down at the base. And that helps to communicate to any of the other koalas nearby that this is their territory. And scientists who have done research on it notice that the scent is strongest during the springtime, the time when the koalas would most likely be looking for mates. Now let's talk a little bit about size of koalas. So it's a little bit debated if there's one species of koala, one subspecies, or if there's two or maybe three subspecies. But throughout their range, they live in eastern and southeastern Australia. They get bigger the further south you go. Now, Australia is on the other side of the planet from us, both around and up and down. So the north part of Australia is actually the warmest part of their country, as opposed to the United States, where up north is usually colder. So the southern area in Australia is the colder part, and the koalas in southern Australia are bigger. Southern koalas typically can weigh between 15 and 29 pounds. The more northern koalas, called Queensland koalas, typically are a bit smaller, weighing in between 9 and 19 pounds. And the Queensland, or the northern koalas, like this guy, they're going to be a little bit more gray in color. The southern ones, or Victorian koalas, are going to be a little more brown. And on the ears, the southern ones have really long hair on the end of their ears. In both the northern and the northern ones also have shorter fur throughout, whereas the southern ones have longer, shaggier, fuzzier hair all around. And in both subspecies, the males are going to be a bit bigger than the females. Now, I saw a question pop up if there's a special name for baby koalas. Baby koalas are called joeys, just like the baby of all marsupials are called joeys. So baby kangaroos are called joeys as well, baby wombats. So a baby koala is a joey. And when they're born, they are just tiny. They are the size of a jelly bean, so not even an inch long. And their eyes aren't open, their ears aren't developed, they don't have any hair. But what they do have is really good, strong arms. And that helps them to climb when they're born from their mom up into her pouch. Now, the nice thing about a koala's climb into the pouch is it's not as difficult as some of the other marsupials, because a koala pouch faces backwards or faces down. The opening's at the bottom. Instead of most marsupials like kangaroos, the opening's at the top, kind of closer to the mom's head. But on koalas and wombats, it's backwards. And that's because koalas and wombats come from a shared ancestor, and wombats live on the ground. And they dig in the dirt a lot. And they don't want to fill their pouch up with dirt, so the pouch opening is backwards. So it faces kind of the rear end of the mom instead. So the distance to crawl is a bit shorter, which is nice for the baby. But the baby climbs into the pouch and it attaches onto a nipple where it starts to drink the mom's milk, and it will stay there for up to 6 months developing. And then it gets its fur during that time, its ears develop more, it opens its eyes, and when it's about 6 months old, it starts to poke out of the pouch a bit. And during that time, it will also first try some eucalyptus and eat some of the leaves from the trees. But during the next 6 months, it will go into the pouch on occasion and still nurse or drink some milk until it's too big to fit in the pouch. During that time, it rides on its mom's chest and then eventually on her back until it explores a little bit and is comfortable moving around on its own. At about a year old, it's big enough and strong enough that it can live on its own and will kind of wander off and live life on its own at that point. Now, koalas can live about 12 to 15 years, with some individuals having made it to 20, but that's a pretty short lifespan. They're not mature until they're about 2 or 3 for a female or 3 or 4 for a male. So it's a pretty short time. We mentioned a little bit earlier their vocalizations. That's how they help connect and attract a mate. Otherwise, they're pretty solitary, or they're pretty much alone. with each koala kind of having its own home range, and sometimes some of the trees in its home range overlaps the home range of another koala. So if they ever meet up, they'll have a little dispute over whose tree it is. If they're both females, they may be pretty cool with each other. If they're both males, they will fight with each other. If it's a male and a female, he'll see if she's interested in breeding, and if not, then she usually tells him to go and leave her alone. One other thing I was gonna say. In working with koalas, I found out that their poop smells like eucalyptus. It's the best smelling poop in the world. And so as a zookeeper, it was never a struggle to clean up koala poop because it kind of smells really nice. Has that very fresh, clean smell, which is very different than most other animal poop. So that was always kind of an added benefit in my time working with koalas. Now, koalas are listed as vulnerable to extinction. That changed in 2012. Before that, they were listed as least concern. So when they got moved to vulnerable, that let a lot of people know that there were dangers with the population. And with the big fires that happened in Australia last year and earlier this year, we still don't really know what impact that had on koalas. Certainly it had some koalas died during those fires from the smoke or from the flames. But many areas of their forest were ruined, and it burned a lot of their trees, and they need the trees to survive. It's all they eat is the leaves off of eucalyptus trees. So without their forest, they're in some pretty bad shape. Now, lots of places in Australia stepped up to help. All the zoos, a lot of sanctuaries, and a lot of animal hospitals. And even people who had wildlife rehab experience stepped in to help take care of a lot of koalas. Later today, I'll post a story up about some of them being returned out to the wild. It's a super great story. So look for that on the Facebook profile later today. In addition to fires, there's some other hazards that koalas face. When they come down on the ground, they aren't always the best at moving, and they're often doing that at night. So being hit by a car is a common problem that causes a lot of deaths for koalas. And the government of Australia and the people of Australia have done some really great things to help mitigate or change that. When I went to visit Australia in 2018, I drove from Sydney up to Brisbane, which is about a 10-hour drive up the coast of Australia. And I was amazed at the number of wildlife crossings I saw along the highway. Now, they're not like our deer crossing signs. It's way more complicated than that. They actually build bridges over the highway to connect the trees on this side with the trees on that side over there. And that enables the koalas and the other tree-dwelling animals to safely cross the road without coming down to the ground. And that's actually helped a lot of local populations of koalas be a lot safer and not get hit by cars. So that's been a huge success in Australia, and something that more places in the world are looking to do to help limit accidents with cars and their wildlife. Now, the other biggest threat that's facing koalas is habitat destruction. So that happens a lot when people decide to cut down the trees. Either they need those trees for lumber, for wood, or paper. But more often it's to clear the land, to either grow crops or build buildings, build roads, build other things that people need. And as cities continue to grow and human populations grow, it continues to intrude upon land that is for the wildlife, where the wildlife need to live. And so that's a huge issue threatening a lot of koalas. Most koalas don't live in protected areas, but kind of live in little forest pockets on privately owned land. And that's something that a lot of people can do to help koalas, is keep big trees like my eucalyptus on their property. But one tree wouldn't be enough. You'd have to have some, and all your neighbors would have to have some for it to benefit koalas. For our special shout out today, we have the Australian Koala Foundation. They've done a lot of education, research, and conservation work to help out koalas throughout Australia, and they continue to do so and help new laws get put in place to protect the forest that the koalas need as well. and also the San Diego Zoo. The San Diego Zoo was the first zoo in the US to have a really strong connection with Australia and have a really good koala program. They got their first koalas back in 1925, but it wasn't until 1960 that they had a baby koala born at the San Diego Zoo. And that's a long time to figure out how to make things work just right to be able to have a baby. Since that time, they've had a really strong population of koalas, and they renewed their contract with the Australian government in the 70s. And today, San Diego leads a lot of the koala that you see in the United States in zoos actually belong to the San Diego Zoo. Now, there's a pretty big exception to that, and it's one that hits close to home for me, is the Los Angeles Zoo also has its own agreement with the government in Australia. And the LA Zoo has its own population of koalas, and they loan them out to about 4 or 5 other zoos as well. Together, San Diego and LA work together to help take care of the koalas in the US, which number about 50 individuals in the US. That fluctuates a bit. It sometimes is as high as like 70 or so, depending on how many babies are born in a given year. But in working with koalas, I had a great opportunity when I was training to be a zookeeper to work with the koalas at the Los Angeles Zoo, and they were one of my favorite species to ever work with. I'll post some more photos and possibly some video later today of some of my experiences there. And although I have visited Australia and I've been in the forest where koalas live, I did not see wild koalas while I was there. I did go to a wildlife sanctuary, and I saw koalas at the sanctuary, and they were doing a really great job of taking care of the koalas there, and they stepped it up even more when the fires happened. So hats off to everyone in Australia who's done a lot of great work to help out the koalas. I'll be putting up more content later today on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I'll post this video, and then also the additional information will be posted on Facebook and possibly Instagram later today as well. So I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about koalas. They are very cute animals. They are not as cuddly as they look. They don't exactly like being held, although I have held one. I've actually held 2 in different places. But yeah, they are very fun, very beautiful animals, and super cool animals to work with. But don't recommend trying to have one as a pet. That wouldn't work so well. But I hope you've enjoyed what I shared with you today. And until tomorrow, take care, be safe, be happy. Bye.